we'll have a look at the technology report next. So, if I just go back into the handbook. So, again, the full details are in the handbook, but I have got an additional briefing document for the report. This will all be on mole. Well, the handbook's already on mole. The briefing documents will go on mole later today. If you're doing ARC584, so you're doing dual town planning, you don't need to do a technology report. Okay? Everybody else does. So let me just go. I'll go straight into my briefing document. So the briefing document, it just gives you a little bit more information about the report. It gives you some images, and there's some kind of pointers in terms of approach and how you can start working on the report. The module handbook gives you more the sort of bare outline of what should be in there, the submission date, and the submission requirements. The report, again this year, like the CMA, we are taking it as a digital submission, okay? But just to point out, and it says it very clearly in the module handbook, you need to print out an A3 version for your end of year exams, okay? And that's because the internal examiners, the external examiners, will not be able to access your digital report during the examination process. So in all previous years, you had to print out either one or two versions of your report. And students have asked over the years, could we, rather than having to print out that report for the submission date, could we just print that out at the end? Which is fine, because again, it means because you're only submitting a digital copy, you don't need to wait for your printout to come. But you do need to print out that A3 version so that the examiners can have a look at it at the end, okay? If you don't, you will be disadvantaged potentially, because an examiner could be looking at your work, and let's say if there was, something missing in terms of the technology. Normally we would then say, well, okay, I think that was covered in the report, so let's have a look. If the report's not there, it's just going to cause me a headache, because I'm going to have to go and print off an A3 version myself. All right, so please print off that A3 version for yourself. But I'll be marking the digital submission. So, the aims of the report: helps you develop your project designs, helps foster a creative project-specific technology, provides a framework for technology and design tutorials, record the project development and the testing, formalize and document project research and precedent, technology-specific, generate large, detailed project representations for use in reviews, portfolio, and end-of-year presentations. Forms an important part of your studio exhibition. So, what some of that is talking about is, because the technology report is an A3 document, it's a largely image-based report. So, in generating those images, in compiling those images, I very much see that those become part of your design process. So when I talk here about project representations for reviews, what I'm meaning there is that if you were, for example, preparing a structural drawing for your technology report, then you would be showing that in a review. It may also be in your end-of-year pinup. If you prepared a drawing, when you have a technology tutorial, you can take that drawing to a tutorial and use it as a discussion point. So, although the technology report is an assessment point, hopefully it's also a kind of way of documenting and formalizing the work that you would be doing anyway. That's what I've just said there. So it should not really be new work created for the report. It's very much seen as the kind of work that you need to do in developing a design. And you capture it and you formalize it. Show and discuss your emerging technology and technology report with your studio tutor. And I would advise you spend a few hours in the library each week looking at journals and references. So start collecting. Okay? Start looking at precedents. Start looking at technology examples. Start looking at buildings. Build this set of reference points in your head, but also take a copy. Okay? You can take a photograph, take an A3 photocopy, whatever, but build up this reference document. Start to collate all the likely material for the report and update this as you progress. So, what I'm saying there is don't leave it to the end. Set up a folder on your computer now for the technology report and start putting things in it. Create a computer folder, but also keep an A3 physical binder. Bring this to tutorials and add all your technology report. So, I really recommend this. Go down to Staples or whatever, and just buy a cheap A3 binder. They're about £3 or something for an A3 clip folder. And start putting things in it. So if you have a drawing, if you have a precedent, put it in there. Bring this along to all your tutorials, whether they're technology tutorials or design tutorials. Bring it along. Okay? What I would suggest is start your InDesign file for your report today. If you're working in InDesign, get the report, get the template, get it set up, and then you've started. And then keep adding to it. So when you have a drawing, drop it in. You may need to tidy it up later. You find a precedent, get it dropped in. And hopefully then you can start to build this report over time, over the next sort of 6.5 weeks. It builds, rather than you do nothing and then you come to it in the last week and you have to put everything in. Okay. So a few methods, a few more ideas. Start drawing, start modelling, start making. Sounds kind of obvious, but just get into the habit now of keep drawing. Hand drawings are really effective. So if you're doing a hand drawing, just do it well enough. Do it neat enough, and then scan it in. And maybe that will end up in the report. If you make a model, take a photograph of it. Draw big, draw to scale. Okay, really important this. No more thumbnails. Okay, it can be a real problem if you keep doing those little tiny thumbnails. You try and put those in a report, they're often just not good enough. They're just too small, or they're too wobbly. So now, not to say that there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with hand drawing. But just give it a bit of quality. Make sure that when you're doing a hand drawing, keep things roughly orthogonal. I use this dotted paper. I find that really effective, just to keep things on the straight and narrow. Okay? Use a ruler if necessary. Work on your handwriting. If you're annotating up a drawing and it looks terrible, just work on that. Maybe try writing in capitals, or find out some way of getting your writing to look better. So, look at this example here. This is I think a really lovely study. This is actually a one-to-one study. It's just sheets of tracing paper, it's pencil. But this student, he did this drawing, he took this picture of it, and it was in his report. So he's not losing that. That becomes a key moment in the project. Here this is this is actually a tutorial sheet, but just a little bit of care about thick lines, thin lines, kind of drawing things to scale, means that this work potentially can become part of your submission. Another example there. So yeah, tools of the trade. I'm sure you know this, but trace is good because you can overlay, your tutor can overlay, you can overlay in a tutorial, a few pens, Tipex, scale ruler, one of these rollers can be good for keeping your lines parallel, or the dotted paper, scalpel blades, use lots of sharp scalpel blades so your models are nice and crisp. Not those horrible craft knives that are, that you haven't changed the blade in 10 years. Change your blade every 10 minutes if you're doing something precise. You need a cutting mat, or your blade will be blunt after one cut. Okay, PVA is the glue for sticking paper and card together. Not Yoo-hoo, not that horrible, you see those models like, ugh, strings all over it. Okay, PVA is the right glue because it absorbs into the surface, sticks it in seconds, and it's invisible. Okay. Laser cutter. If you've not used the laser cutter, don't be afraid of it. Go down, speak to Laura at the workshop, and say, Laura, I'm terrified of that laser cutter. Can you help me? And she'll help you with it. Okay. Don't use the laser cutter for everything, but it can be incredibly effective. And I remember when I first used it, I made a contour model, and I was terrified, and I thought, it's going to set fire, and it's going to not work, and I'm going to look like such an idiot. 20 minutes later, I had the most precise contour model I'd ever done in my life. So I did another one. I was doing this for work. I went into work with 2 contour models, and because it's so crisp, it was just immaculate. And in the past, I would have sat there and spent 2 days cutting that with a scalpel. So, there are benefits. If you're interested, using a rendering package, software rendering package, can be very effective. It's not for everybody, but when you look at the reports, you'll see some quite good work where people have even a basic SketchUp model, and they've maybe used V-Ray for SketchUp or Kirkathea or one of these free rendering packages. Sometimes just to make a kind of nicer, like a soft rendering, not to try and make a photorealistic render, but, sometimes that can be quite effective. And, those are packages you can learn fairly quickly. Okay, so that's an example of the laser cutter. And the image on the bottom there is an example of just a very simple render. And I think this was a V-Ray. This is a V-Ray for SketchUp render. So it's a SketchUp model, and this person, they just wanted a slightly sort of softer lighting effect. So they've used V-Ray for SketchUp, and it kind of works. So yeah, analog, digital. Think about both. Okay. Both have weaknesses, both have strengths. Quite often, analog, i.e., drawing by hand, it can be quicker. Not always, but it can be quicker for certain types of exploration. Or, sometimes you might need to use both. So, for example, this image on the top, which is it's actually by Levitate Architects, and I'm sure they have used a Google aerial photo, or they've got a 3-dimensional model which they are then drawing over. But they're using that sort of hand-drawn technique very effectively. Okay. So the report is A3. And this is really important. We used to allow A4 reports, but the A3 I think is much better. So it allows you to develop key drawings, and we're very much looking for key drawings in the report. If you look at the example here, the page on the right is a drawing. Okay, it's purely a drawing put on a sheet. And then on the left, we've got a few other smaller drawings, and we've got a little bit of text. Okay? For the technology, it needs to be drawn. It's not a dissertation. We're not looking for 10,000 words of writing. Okay? The other benefit of A3 is that it's an A1 scaled down by 50%. So 1 to 100 becomes 1 to 200. So the drawings in the report are very legible. And if you want to, you can spread a drawing across both sheets, and that will give you an A2. Fill the page, I'm suggesting. So for example, like here, let that drawing take the full page. Don't kind of reduce the quality of your drawings by squashing them down too much. You can incorporate the CMA, because by the time you're finishing off your technology report, your CMA is finished. So we quite expect you to be extracting work from the CMA, putting it in the report. The A3 is a better size for reviews and examinations. It's a bit bigger. You can actually pin those sheets up. They will work. It's more likely to be looked at by the examiners. And I think it's a great document for job interviews in the future, because it's a kind of, it will be a visual document. It's a design document, but it's showing technical ability. And it's a good technique, because in practice now, there's a lot of work done putting reports together. So I think now I've just got a few example images of reports. So I'll go through these, and then on mobile, you've got a folder called Example Reports, and they're not all in there yet, but there'll be probably about 12 sort of good example reports from previous years. What I do is I've put reports that are graded A or B in there. Okay, I don't just put the best reports we've ever had, because sometimes that can be a bit intimidating. But equally, I don't put the sort of C's and the D's, because I don't want you to aim for that level. I want you to aim for the B's and the A's. Okay, so they can be really good, because look at those. You know that they all got a good mark. You can be confident that's the kind of work that we're looking for. Okay, and what I would suggest is look through those reports and get ideas. If you see a certain way of representing a site, you don't need to reinvent the wheel in terms of drawings. So you might then say, yeah, I'm going to do that kind of drawing. Great. Let's say somebody's done a really good structural page. You might look and say, yeah, I can do that technique. That will work for me. So, really learn from those reports. So a few more examples here, showing the kind of importance of the drawings. So here we're talking about structure. It's a bit faint, isn't it, to you? Anyway, you can look at this in your own time. There's a little bit of text, but we're relying on the images. Okay, that's just what I've said. You've only got 20 pages. Okay, so you have to condense it into 20 pages. It says in the module handbook, you can have additional to the 20 pages your index, contents. A lot of students like to write thanks to Aidan Hoggard because he was the best tutor. No, they don't really. But it's the 20 pages of content, all right, that will count. All right, so don't worry if your bibliography and index is on top of that. Okay. So yeah, key sections. So what I've done here is I've put together a list of the kind of possible key sections in the report. Now, the really key thing about the technology report is we're looking for you to concentrate on your project-specific technology. So we're not giving you a set of kind of generic sections that you all have to do. So let's say, for example, if one student is really interested in daylight design, and that's what their project is all about, they might have 8 pages about daylight in the report, and they might have 2 pages about structure, and they might have, in some cases, almost nothing about acoustics. In some projects, acoustics is just not a key part of the design, let's say. So it's up to you to decide on how you kind of apportion the pages to your technology. But having said that, you need to make sure that you cover certain areas, okay? That's all detailed in the handbook. But things like, for example, everybody needs to have a structure for a building. Everybody should be talking about their sustainable approach. I would expect something on daylighting or sunlighting for virtually all projects. It's very unusual to have a project which daylight is not a factor. Materiality, again, I would expect most of you to be interested in that. Water systems, maybe not. Some projects, that's just not a key part. You can't do everything. Design for disassembly, it may not be always relevant. Some of the assessment methods, BREEAM, Code for Sustainable Homes, it depends on your project. If you're doing a housing scheme, then probably Code for Sustainable Homes would be important. But if you're doing a concert hall, it would not. Okay? But I've put down there some ideas. And you'll see when you look through the examples, the kind of themes that students have covered. Okay, a little bit about layout graphics here. I'm sure you know all of this, but just to make sure. Okay, I would recommend you use a proper package like InDesign. If you try and put this together in Word, I think you'll get frustrated because it doesn't really handle images well. The benefit of InDesign is because you've got your images are linked. If you change that image, the image will change. Okay. Hierarchy of text. Main heading, subheadings, text, and notes. So this is really important. Think carefully about your text. So we've got a main heading here, and it's the biggest. Okay, so it draws the eye. That's what we read first. Then you may have a subheading. But you then want to move fairly swiftly, that's my mouse, into the main text, into notes. And generally, that needs to be quite small, because bearing in mind these are A3 sheets, if that text is too large, it dominates the drawings, and the sort of quality of the drawings is reduced because the text is just dominating it. So, I'll give you an example here. If you get El Croquis magazine or Detail magazine, their normal text is 2 millimeters high. Okay, it's pretty small. Now, as long as that's printed at a reasonable quality, that's perfectly legible. And bearing in mind that, I'll be reading these on a screen, that 2 millimeter text is okay. You can read that. Do print out tests regularly. Don't work on the document to the last minute and then print it and realise that things don't look quite right. Print it on a piece of paper. Give drawings space. Key drawings should be a whole page or a 2-page spread. Don't squash your drawings in. Absolutely do not overlap drawings. All right, that is disastrous when that happens. When you start overlaying a site plan with something else with a bit of text. Almost like you run out of paper. Okay, that virtually never works. So, just be wary of that. Controlled colour. Not that we're obsessive about the appearance of these reports, but quite often, just controlling the use of colour gives that colour more impact. And if the whole report is a ride of colour, then those sort of colour points don't stand out. Thin lines, grey lines, dotted lines. Quite important, if you're doing a note for a drawing, the drawing ought to be the strongest feature on that page. So those arrows and notes need to be really subtle. which is why often doing them thin or grey or dotted is effective. Really ruins a good drawing if you put a really horrible thick arrow over it. Okay. Best quality printing. I know you're submitting digitally, but when you print it out to the examiners, just get the best A3 print you can do. Right. Simple binding. All I'm asking for is a spiral bind for the examiners. It doesn't need to be a hard bound or anything like that. And as usual, contents, page numbers, bibliography. So I'm going to just run through fairly quickly a few examples here. So here's a site plan in a report. Clearly this is a project drawing, and this drawing would work equally well probably as an A1 on the wall. So when I'm talking about this sort of maximising the benefit of the work, this drawing works in the report, but it works as a design drawing. Here we've got structural analysis, and here this student has used a sort of simple render package to produce this kind of image at the top. And here we've got some very effective hand drawing. This was the same project as the previous one. So we've got a section here. So probably at the stage when the report was submitted, the student didn't have sort of detailed building level yet, but they've got some hand drawings. And they've labelled them up very carefully. They've actually labelled them in the computer, and those are very good drawings. Very good site information here. What's really good here is we get the London scale, we get a kind of district scale, and then we get a local neighbourhood scale, so that if you don't know the site, you can really understand it. Here's some hand-drawn site analysis. Get your Google aerial map, Google Earth image, and draw over it. Very effective. And this is a more kind of design type drawing. That site. Here we've got some pollution analysis and some sound analysis. And here moving into artificial light. Good use in this report of often there'll be a full page drawing on one side and then a bit of sort of text and analysis on the other side. I'm going to go through these quite quickly now. Okay, I'm not going to talk about them all. Lighting study. These were done on the Heliodon. These are lots of photographs taken from the Heliodon. Really careful layout on the page. Sort of small amounts of text, carefully arranging the images. A section, if you've got that level of information. If you've got detailed information, that can go in the report, but you may not have. Very, very image-based work here with a section and an axonometric. And again, detailed drawing. Here we've got some sort of kind of CMA work, looking in detail at some of this materiality, and that goes in the report. Again, more CMA work, and again. So for this example, this is straight from the CMA, but the student's taken those images and they've just reformatted it in the report. Some plans, some more details. Skip over this quite quickly. Hand-drawn detail here. Again, this was a CMA piece of work, which was then used in the report. Drainage. You can look at these in your own time. So go quickly. Hand-drawn. Really lovely layout on this sheet. Really carefully arranging the sheet. Good use of a hand-drawn environmental section here. Some model images, detailed drawings if you've got them. Again, this was a model from the CMA. Interesting sheet here, hand-drawn. detail, precedent, which is about shipbuilding, and then a precedent project, so a project that the student was interested in. So we're getting all three here on the same sheet. Looking at materials, more kind of CMA work, looking at the assembly process here, structural study, and looking at archaeology in this case. Technology transfer from aeroplanes into the building. Structural study here, making good use of 3D computer models. And I have to say, for a lot of structural work, building a computer model is often the quickest because you can make a bay and you can duplicate it. Very well, I don't expect this really. This is some in-depth structural analysis. Structural study. This is good here. I mean, I like to see this. We've got the kind of 3D model of the structure and also a sketchbook extract here to show us some of the process. We'll go through these environmental type drawings. Exploded axonometric with precedent studies here. And just a very quick hand-drawn section. Okay. That's a bit rapid there. Okay. The other place to look for references is look me up on Pinterest. I know I've mentioned this to you before, but I've got a number of boards on Pinterest that are looking at different types of drawing. Any questions on the report? Okay. Yep.
Is it marked in isolation? Do you need to introduce at the beginning to say?
Yeah. Yeah. It says that in the module handbook, there's a little bit more information about what needs to go in it, and it does mention a brief summary of the project. So maybe 1 or 2 pages, so that because it is important, we need to understand your project so that we can understand your technology, basically. Yeah. But don't overdo it. Okay. And equally, don't worry if that's completely duplicated from your design report or management report. That doesn't matter. We're not worried at all about, the way I see it, this is all your project. So, you don't need to worry if an image appears in the design report, and it might be on the CMA, and it might be in the technology report, and you might put it on the wall at the end of the year. If it's your work, it's your work. So, you're building a project, and these different submissions are all part of that project. It does not mean that you're not going to lose marks because you've used something twice.